All right, let's do the Bitcoin thing real quick.
Bitcoin went back above 30,000. Bitcoin above 30,000. Bitcoin's going to 1 million. Bitcoin to 100 million.
Yeah, Bitcoin is back up, and in the wake of this, there was a big New York Times story, which I mean, it's very long and dense. You should look into it. It's very wild. They basically claim to have done an in-depth look, and they use this nonprofit who measures a lot of these things with the use of resources around cryptocurrency mining, and they found that there's a huge cost for these operations. And
what kind of cost?
Well, so they had a bunch of stories. If you click on the link, the first story is probably the most egregious example, but they have other examples as well. And so there's this story about you probably remember the Texas power grid.
Who could forget? Collapsing.
Yes, and so the first story, it opens with this first story about, so Texas was gasping for electricity. Winter Storm Uri had knocked out power plants across the state, leaving tens of thousands of homes in icy darkness. By the end of February 14th, 2021, nearly 40 people had died, some from the freezing cold. Meanwhile, in the husk of a one-time aluminum smelting plant, an hour outside of Austin, row upon row of computers were using enough electricity to power about 6,500 homes as they raced to earn Bitcoin, the world's largest cryptocurrency. Go down a little bit because, whatever, they explain how it works. But in Texas, the computers kept running until just after midnight. Then the state's power grid operator ordered them shut off under an agreement that allowed it to do so if the system was about to fail. In return, it began paying the Bitcoin company BitDeer an average of $175,000 an hour to keep the computers offline. Over the next 4 days, BitDeer would make more than $18 million
Holy fuck.
for not operating from fees ultimately paid by Texans who had endured the storm.
Good for BitDeer. Good for you.
They go through these things where not only are they using power when others are going without it, they then have these opportunities in certain states, especially New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, and I'm blanking on the other one, but they have these agreements where when they willingly shut off their power, they get paid these absurd amounts of money, right? So let's see here. So in some states, notably New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas, Bitcoin operators' revenue can ultimately come from other power customers. The clearest example is Texas, where Bitcoin companies are paid by the grid operator for promising to quickly power down, if necessary, to prevent blackouts. In practice, they rarely are asked to shut down and instead earn additional money while doing exactly what they would have been doing anyway. 5 operations have collectively made at least $60 million from that program.
Jesus fucking God.
So, this is obviously wrong and FUD, and the New York Times just hates.
And also, how much CO2 does New York Times emit? Huh?
Right. Well, they also point out that apparently this is, it's not necessary to have this complicated of an algorithm like Bitcoin does. Some currencies like Ethereum have put in place systems that have made it easier to mine cryptocurrency, so you don't have to use all this energy. But the funniest part about this is that there's been a pushback, and it's annoying because I don't like to just read a New York Times story and go like, well, I'm sure they're right, but but crypto is always the hardest to get an accurate, reasonable response.
Totally.
And so the responses were either just Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained, doing that fucking meme face with a Bitcoin, and you're like, okay, that isn't a response. Or it's like Natalie Brunell had who came on the show. She responded to them and she was like, but this is worth it because the ultimate cost is us not having. And you're like, okay, and so. And then there are some people who are saying these are way overstated amounts of energy they're using.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot, like no one had good links for anything to respond to it. And
the best one
was Riot Platforms, who is named in the article as one of these farms doing these, or as one of these mining people. And well, let's just watch it.
But they start out by saying
we're not going to watch the whole thing.
Zero carbon emissions, they claim.
You'll get what's happening in a very short while.
We're here out in Rockdale, Texas. We've got lots of plants here. These plants are consuming CO2.
He's in a
and
fucking
emitting
field
oxygen,
with grass.
Which is fantastic. When we measure CO2 out here, we're in the green. There are very low levels of CO2, 455 parts per million of CO2. Just fantastic reading. Rockdale has some of the freshest air I've ever breathed. So this is a great way to establish a baseline. We're going to go inside the mining facility and we're going to see how much is this number going to go up. If the number does not go up, then the mining rigs are not emitting any CO2.
Just a total troll.
Down, that would be interesting as well. So let's find out.
Let's find
All right.
out.
That's where the science happens.
Okay.
It's the largest Bitcoin mining facility in the United States. Outside, we were at 455 parts per million.
Let's find out what we're at inside.
Inside, we're at 400.
Well, would you look at that? All right, you can pause it.
It's just
But so,
the spirit of crypto is trolling and
but that's the thing. Either one of two things
disingenuous
is
takes.
either happening. He's either genuine and a moron and thinks that that's how CO2 emissions work,
Yeah.
and that when they're Bitcoin mining, they're just all kind of spraying off. But what people are really talking about is that you need to burn fossil fuels to power these things.
Yeah,
Or he's trolling.
I think he's
And
trolling.
so I'm sure I imagine he's trolling. But that's the only thing. You either get like, fuck you, suck it, like, you suck, ha 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 ha.
Total disingenuous takes like that.
Or just absolute bird-brained,
Yeah.
moronic shit. And I'm like, okay. Bravo. I mean, they're always figuring out a new scam.
Yeah.
You got to give it to them.
You really do. Oh, Jesus fucking God. Well, it's our fault for not buying Bitcoin. I mean, look at us.
Hey, I think year to date, if you got in, you would have doubled your money.
Yep. Yeah, actually.